Hello and welcome to the Raising Kellan podcast. My name is Marsh Naidoo and I blog at raisingkellan.org, where we curate resources for parents raising children with disabilities. On today's episode 118, we chat with Jeff Strand from the Tennessee Disability Coalition, who is going to inform us of the legislation that has passed in 2024 in the Tennessee legislature, as well as what's currently being worked for this coming year, 2025. Just a little reminder, the content on this podcast is for your information only, and if you seek advice for a specific situation, to always contact a trained professional. Without further ado, grab your cup of coffee, put your feet up, and get ready for some awesome conversation. Welcome to the Raising Kellan podcast. I'm joined this morning by Jeff Strand, who is the Coordinator of Government and External Affairs from the Tennessee Disability Coalition. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on the Raising Kellan podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you came on earlier this year on episode 111, basically to inform us of some of the priority bills that were going to be heard in the House and the Senate at the 113th General Assembly here in Tennessee. I would really like to kind of touch base with you, Jeff, so we can get some updates as to how these bills have progressed through.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was excited to be on last time because, as we were mentioning earlier, it's really important that folks know what's going on and they know what to be looking for. So I'm happy to wrap those things up. One of the first ones we were looking at was what, so I have in this job failed to get good at remembering the name or the numbers of these bills. So I give them their own little names. So I'll just go by the names here. We called it the TCA Cleanup Bill, and the TCA being the Tennessee Code. So we had gotten a call from someone who was redoing their disability parking placard. So you can park in a disability spot. And they saw some really kind of outdated and even a little bit offensive language in that application. So they asked us to take a look at it and see if we could do something about it. We saw that language came just based straight out of the code. It was just old language that was put in there in the 70s, and that's how they built out their application. So this was a simple bill that just went in and updated, modernized that language, and that one passed relatively easily. That was the first bill that went through for us, and really no opposition to that one. We did have one interesting senator who did not like it throughout the process, but one upset senator was not going to stop that one. So that was our first one, our easiest one going forward this year. One of my favorite ones, because it wraps up some work we were doing on wheelchair repair, is what we called Right to Repair Part 2. And so last year during the session, we passed Right to Repair Part 1, which prohibited prior authorization for the repair of a wheelchair. This Part 2 that we passed this year intended to speed up the rest of the process of getting a wheelchair repaired. And it really gets to the right to repair part. It establishes two new ways to get your wheelchair fixed. One is through annual preventative maintenance provided by your wheelchair supplier. To whoever sold you the wheelchair, you call them up, say, hey, it's that time of year. Can you come out and kick the tires on my wheelchair, see what's up, tighten some bolts, the basic preventative maintenance stuff. And that is a covered practice. So you wouldn't have to pay for that out of pocket. And then we established Right to Repair. So there's a list of simple non-clinical repairs like flat tires, broken spokes, tears in the seat cushion, that type of thing that you can now have an independent repair person do. That one you do have to pay out of pocket, but we're really excited about it because we worked with the wheelchair suppliers, the manufacturers, consumers, almost all interested stakeholder parties to get this one across the line. And at least according to wheelchair experts out there who worked with us on this will be one of the most comprehensive avenues to getting your wheelchair fixed in the country.
It's actually pretty interesting, Jeff, because, and I'm going to try and pull it up as we're talking. I got an email yesterday from New Motion. Basically, it said that they were going to invite stakeholders to just further discussion about wheelchair repairs. And they actually mentioned Tennessee's right to repair. So it was kind of exciting to see, hey, this is a national company that has picked up on this very meaningful legislation that affects the community.
Well, that's great to hear because New Motion sent a representative down for our Disability Day on the Hill who went around and met with legislators to talk about this piece of legislation. So they had their hand in it too. So glad to hear that they're excited about it.
Jeff, we've been hearing about Medicaid or TCA for working adults with disabilities. And I can't say much, but I really do want to hear how that's evolved over the last few months.
Of course, that's one we're really proud of. So that's one of those ones that came to us in my favorite way that we get our policy platform is we had an advocate who came to us and asked us to help him fix a problem. So his name is Robbie. 2 years ago, he was in a car accident, going out to dinner, slid off the road and was paralyzed from the neck down. Spent 2 years rehabbing in various hospitals at home. And now he's ready to go back to work. He's a former Vanderbilt football player, worked in corporate finance here in Nashville, and was ready to try to, kind of resume his life, fundamentally different now with a disability, but still, the same ambitions, the same desire to choose one's own path that everybody has. But he found that he needed 24-hour care. He's paralyzed from the neck down. He needs help to do almost everything. And no private insurance was going to cover that. The only entity that would cover it would be TennCare and Medicaid. So like 46 other states before us, he proposed to us a Medicaid buy-in program. And in fact, he proposed to Representative Darren Jernigan, who is retiring after this year, who brought it to us. And we told him it was going to be a heavy lift. It's difficult to get something like this passed in 1 year. It is vaguely sort of close to Medicaid expansion, which is scary and unwelcome at the General Assembly. But we worked with a couple really great sponsors. Senator Bo Watson, he chairs the Finance Committee, and he was really our money guy. We had Representative Tim Hicks, who really kind of put the heart behind it. Robbie came in and testified in all the committees, spoke to dozens of legislators, and it was a really popular bill. It makes sense in this General Assembly environment. These are folks with disabilities who want to go to work. They want to raise a family. They don't want to be, hindered by the bounds of government reach through TennCare and Medicaid programs, and they just want to live their lives, right? So it was really politically popular, but we also knew that it was going to be expensive. And so the first fiscal note that came out, the fiscal note is their estimate of how much it's going to cost. If you're going to get your bill passed, you have to appropriate the correct amount of money found in the fiscal note in the final budget. So it's essentially the Office of Fiscal Review guesses, and if you're going to pass it, it has to be included in the final budget at that guess amount. And they guessed $19 million a year, which was like $17.5 million more than we had estimated when we ran the numbers. So we worked with Senator Watson, we worked with Fiscal Review, and were able to get it down to about $9 million a year. And even then, this was a tight budget environment this year. We're currently running a revenue deficit, a budget deficit. They're expecting it to be over $850 million at the end of the year. So there's not much money to spend. But there is a mechanism in our Medicaid waiver, the approval that we get from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid and the federal government, called TennCare 3, that has this concept called shared savings. And to be honest, I don't like shared savings. Shared savings are, so if TennCare doesn't spend its current pot of money that the federal government and the state put towards Medicaid, they're allowed to split the remaining pot with the feds, so long as TennCare or Tennessee spends its share on new populations and new services. And so that sounds great, but that means that they didn't spend in this case, almost $700 million on their current Medicaid population. And so they're shifting those funds to a different population, a new population. And it's often used, kind of cynically to make a lawmaker, in some cases the governor, look good. We're going to offer diapers to new mothers to the age of 2. That's a good thing. But it's also, that's taking away funds that could have gone to the services of people with more profound disability, people who aren't getting anything. So that's a little bit of a digression. My thoughts on TennCare 3 and shared savings. However, this bill was written so that it would be funded out of those shared savings, because someone like Robbie is a new population, not part of the Medicaid population currently, not currently eligible, only under this program. So this bill qualified to be paid for by shared savings. Even then, we spoke to the House budget chair, who said, can you get this down under $1 million? Then we can probably figure something out. And we couldn't convince Fiscal Review to get down that low. So it was a really popular bill. We had great advocates. We worked really hard on it, but it seemed we were coming up against that financial wall. And then our contract lobbyists at Capitol and Fifth called me one day when I was driving home and said, they're going to fund it. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know who did it. I don't know who pulled the right strings. I don't know if it was just a popular enough bill. They set aside the money, but they did. And so we went down, our advocates came down, they got to go on the Senate floor. It passed unanimously in the House and Senate. Every senator signed on to be a co-sponsor. There are 77 co-sponsors in the House, and it passed unanimously. And so this summer, TennCare will submit a waiver to the federal government, who will approve this new program, this Medicaid buy-in program, and it'll allow folks to go to work, maintain their TennCare eligibility above and beyond the income and asset limit, so long as they pay 5% of their annual income towards Medicaid.
So, Jeff, let me understand this. So typically, there would be an income level that individuals with disability would have to kind of fall under. Is it around $2,000 or so a month? But if they were above that amount, then they could not apply or be eligible for TennCare. But this waiver, if an adult was working and earning above that amount, they could still buy into TennCare, which would probably fund things like community-based services or in-home care, which is incredibly expensive if you are needing anywhere between 12 to 24 hours of care a day.
Right. Yeah. And so those income and asset limits are really strict. Yeah, it's somewhere in that $20,000 to $30,000 a year for an individual. You can't have more than $2,000 in assets. So that, foregoes any opportunity for a retirement fund or saving up for a down payment for a house. All of that stuff is out the window. We have very, very few spousal protections. Spousal impoverishment protections is what they're called, to protect a person with a disability, their spouse, from those same income and asset thresholds.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so the Fed set a very minimum standard. I think it's your spouse can protect up to, I think it was $100,000 in assets, and it was roughly 1.5 times the income limit. But that is the minimum bare standard of what someone can have in a household. Other states have provided and passed larger protections, higher asset limits, no income limits, that type of thing. But we are very strict here. So when Robbie, our advocate, talks about this will give him the chance to, have a family, it truly means that he can get married and not lose his TennCare eligibility just because of how much money his spouse makes.
Yeah, those are profound changes. It really is. Yeah. I know the other bill that we were watching pretty close, the Paid Family Giving Resolution. What's the word on that, Jeff?
That one also passed both the Senate and the House. So that one's a resolution, which is different from a bill. A bill tells the state what they have to do. The resolution suggests strongly that they should. The sentiment is that the General Assembly believes that the state should do this, but there's no, requirement that they do so. And so we had a bunch of whereas clauses, which is typical of a resolution, where we describe the problem. And then very simply at the end, it says, hereby it resolved by the General Assembly that we urge TennCare in the state to implement a comprehensive statewide paid family caregiving program. And so it passed without real opposition. TennCare sort of sat this one out, probably because it's a resolution. And so the intent in passing this resolution was not to just sit on those laurels and say, look, they think we should do it. It's that it gives TennCare the opportunity to do it in the meantime. And if they have no plans to do so, we'll propose legislation next year to do so. And any sort of family caregiving program, what that design looks like, who's eligible, how much it pays, all of that stuff is up in the air, right? So this was not specific about how it should look. It's just that TennCare should begin to do so. And so we're not under really any illusion that they will decide this summer that they're suddenly going to implement, an affirmative program like this. But it does allow us to go back to the General Assembly next year and say, hey, you thought last year we should do this thing. TennCare did not take you up on your suggestion. Now we need to tell them that they have to do that. So it's kind of this 1-2 process of getting something that's difficult, like a program like this, passed and implemented in the state.
So for family advocates like ours, this is something we would still kind of need to, speak to legislators about and try and garner support for in the upcoming year, because it's like not completely done, so to speak. It's still something in the works. So paid family caregiving resolution, and that will enable parents or caregivers to perhaps receive a stipend if the individual with disability is at home.
Yeah. And it could look a bunch of ways. It could be a stipend. It could be a wage. It could be that you're hired by, a provider agency who staffs other direct support professionals. It could be a standalone program. Georgia has a standalone program where the state acts as the provider organization. There are a lot of ways that we could look at doing this, and that's all up in the air. And the important thing in the meantime for families is that we know we need to hear what families want out of a program like this. It's some of the work that we did last fall. We had some focus groups to talk about the priorities in a program like this for families. And now that the resolution has passed and we really want to get this implemented, we want to hear more about what priorities are, what they want it to look like, what fears of families are, things that we need to avoid, collateral damage, that type of thing. So we'll be working this summer and into the fall, kind of engaging family in the community, helping us craft out what this could look like. We're going to recruit some legislative champions down at Cordell Hall in the General Assembly. And then the plan is next year, if TennCare has not taken up the suggestion, to put forward a piece of legislation. And to kind of build off of what TennCare thinks about this, because that's a really important thing here, was another bill that went through kind of under the radar for us. It had gotten to the Health Subcommittee and we hadn't seen anything about it. It was by Representative Parkinson and Senator Briggs that kind of codified this idea that said that a person cannot be ineligible for payment through the Medicaid Home and Community-Based Services waiver if they live in the same household as the person with a disability. So this is that practice, because we know it's not a policy of TennCare's, this practice that generally excluded people who lived with the person that they were caring for from this payment. You could hire, if you're an adult with an adult child with intellectual disabilities, for example, you could hire your cousin who lives a couple blocks down to come over and be a support person. But if your cousin lived in the house, that wasn't allowed. They called it natural supports, which I learned in our engagement last year is sort of a derogatory term for a family member who is caring for a loved one, especially in light of the absence of services that they should be receiving. And so TennCare got up on the stand and said, this is our longstanding policy. We don't forbid this. This is kind of a rumor. So really just codifying this policy. And, we'd listen to Representative Parkinson say, well, that's good. That's not what I'm hearing, but I'm glad that that's your policy and I'm glad you're putting it in the code. And so TennCare sort of had to sit it out. They tinkered a little bit around with the language, but it's true that it's never been written policy to forbid a family member who lives in the same household from being paid. But we know from a decade plus in advocacy for this in this space that TennCare does everything in its power, short of a policy, to prevent this from happening, because they believe that if they start paying family members, their costs will be out of control. And that's their primary object when they're expressing concern about this. So we're really glad that, Representative Parkinson and Senator Briggs brought that on their own. It came from one of their constituents as well. We were able to help them a little bit, but that was really them. But, combined with the resolution, the codification of this practice into policy, I think sets a really good foundation for pushing a piece of legislation next year.
I remember when we talked on episode 111, the one thing that we had some discussion about was like the conduit accommodation for individuals with disability. Has anything transpired with regards to that, or?
Yeah. So that was the toughest part of the session for us. We passed all 4 of our bills. We were able to influence some other things that, protected people with disabilities. But this was one that truly illuminated a divide in the community. And we saw it play out at the General Assembly. So we tried to work with representatives of the 2 companies that want this licensure exemption that would allow them to have more than 4 people in a single dwelling and closer than 500 yards. After a while, they were amenable to it. We saw some hijinks from some paid lobbyists that were not our lobbyists, kind of going around and saying things that did not reflect well on us or even the 2 companies that are getting the exemption. And we were finally able to work it out a little bit so that we could try to compromise on this issue, kind of keep it small and localized. They get a little bit, we get a little bit. But we talked with our board at the Disability Coalition. We talked with our membership. We talked with longtime inclusion advocates who've been working with the coalition for far longer than I've been here, who fought this original fight at the end of the closure of the state's institutions. And they said that they were unwilling to bend on the 4 number, more than 4 people in a household. And I heard a lot of interesting history, when they established the 4 as it's not a magic number, it's the number they picked out of the hat, but they thought it most resembled the size of a family. And that's where I come back to thinking, did we do the right thing here? Are we in the right spot? Are we truly helping as many people as possible? What's the long game here? But hearing that when they decided in the 90s that 4 is the number because that's the size of a family, it really, kind of hits home and strikes that chord with me that says, I'm glad we had this fight. And so we had, must have been an hour of testimony in the subcommittee from both sides, our side, and then, the 2 companies and a couple advocates who are really into that idea of congregate living. And then in House Health, the full health committee, it was maybe the whole committee. It was like an hour and 45 minutes. We went back and forth and engaged with legislators. And ultimately, the bill passed. We weren't convinced that they would get funding in the way that we weren't convinced we'd get funding on things. But they were included in the final budget at about $1 million a year. So this passed. So these 2 companies will now have this exemption. We kind of stood on our values on this one. So I'm glad of the place we ended up in. But I am concerned because we're already hearing from other companies. We're hearing from legislators who are reaching out to us to say that there are companies in their district that want to open up new congregate facilities. So we know that this wasn't ever going to be localized with these 2 companies, that as soon as somebody gets the exemption, it opens the door for everybody to get the exemption. But it was a difficult fight. And we at the Disability Coalition, from our perspective, we lost. But it's a really tricky subject because the folks that are really pushing for this, the parents and advocates that are really pushing for this, get nothing from the state. The state is entirely failing them. These are folks in like ECF choices groups, 7 and 8, kids with, or they have, adult children who manifest behavior needs. and the state just provides them nothing. So if your option is nothing or, something that, it is unproven and untested, and the only evidence we have of its success is our state's institutions, you might choose that. And so it really learned a lot from this one.
How can we be more involved, Jeff? How can we be more involved, for example, in the coming year?
Yeah, so this is my favorite part because we have already turned our eyes to next session. It might be 8 months, 7 months away, a long time away. But we've got a lot of work to do in the meantime. So some of the things that we want to work on next year is paid family caregiving. And so there'll be opportunities to participate in focus groups, in a working group, to start to build out what this policy should look like, recruiting our sponsors. So anywhere along that spectrum, from you want to provide a little bit of input about what you'd like this program to look like, to I want to go up to Cordell Hall and sit in front of my legislator and ask them to be the sponsor. There are a ton of ways to plug into that. We want to work on special ed. I am just about to release a white paper that I've been working on since about last June, highlighting policies and practices that affect kids with behavior needs in schools. So I'm taking a look at IDA, the special ed law, and how well it works for most kids with disabilities, but how poorly it works for kids with behavior needs. And so beginning to work on that in the state here, we could pioneer in the country how to work with this population and help them succeed at a higher rate than anywhere else, especially a higher rate than they're currently. So we are, again, having focus groups. We're going to have a working group. We're going to build out from the white paper a piece of legislation we want to bring. And so I propose about 16 in the paper, and we're going to kind of break those down with this group and try to figure out where to go from there. There's more legislative recruiting to go into. We want to work on Katie Beckett this year. There's some issues within Part A that makes it really inflexible and difficult for families to use. So we want to make it a little bit easier. I've already spoken with a senator who wants what he calls a comprehensive fix. So taking a look at, if you're a Katie Beckett family, what's working for you, what's not working for you. This is an opportunity. Here's a legislator who wants to work on this with us. We want to work on some open meeting stuff, is making sure that people have accommodations to participate in state and local government. We've got more, but this is kind of how it goes. Is when we get 2 years in a row like this, where we hear from our constituency, they tell us here's a problem, they work with us, and we get to a solution, and it passes. It just begets more opportunities to do the same. So we hear a lot from from the disability community telling us, can you help us work on this? Here's a problem. I want to work on this. Can you support it? Type of thing. And that makes me really excited because it means that the community is getting more and more engaged, and demonstrating more and more agency in changing Tennessee for the better. So all that is to say, you could always email me, Jeff_S@tndisability.org. You can text teamwork to 72690. It'll send alerts and updates to your phone. Check our website, tndisability.org, our social medias @tndisability, and just be in touch, because we'll put out plenty of opportunities and we're going to need plenty of help. And the best way to get these things, put into place and pass through the legislature is to have strong advocates come in and be the spokespersons for it. And that's what we've done in the past, and that's what we want to do again this year.
Jeff, thank you so much for all that you do and all that's done by the coalition. And I know it's going to be a working summer, but nonetheless, have a great summer and hope to speak to you in the new year again.
Thank you. And I'll be here back in January to give you a new update.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening along on the podcast today. Guys, please remember, we would really appreciate a rate and a review of this podcast episode. It helps us be found by others looking for this material. See you guys on the next episode. And as always, remember, get to the top of your mountain. This is Marsh Naidoo signing off.